The call came while she was still in her hospital gown, the IV line still taped to the back of her hand. Delia picked up because she always picked up. 22 years of marriage had trained her body to respond to his ringtone, the way some people respond to a smoke alarm, not with calm, but with a kind of automatic, breathless readiness. "You coming home tonight?" Derek asked. "No, how are you?" "No, what did the doctor say?" "Just that." Delia looked up at the water stain on the ceiling above her bed. She had been staring at it for 3 hours. It was shaped, she had decided, like a hand reaching for something just out of frame. "Derek," she said carefully, "I had surgery this morning." "I know," he said, "but the pipes under the kitchen sink are leaking again and I don't know where you keep the towels." She didn't say anything for a long moment. "Third shelf," she said. "Linen closet." "Which one?" "The one in the hallway." "Oh." A pause. "So you coming home or what?" "Not cinematic." Just a Tuesday afternoon in October, a water stain shaped like a hand, and a question that had no warmth in it at all. Delia pressed the end call button and set the phone face down on her stomach. Her chest rose and fell. The monitor beside her beeped steadily. She had been in that bed since 6 o'clock in the morning. She had gone into the hospital alone, checked herself in alone, signed her own consent forms alone. The nurse who prepped her for the laparoscopy had asked if anyone was coming to sit with her, and Delia had said her husband was on his way. She still didn't know why she said that. He hadn't been on his way. He hadn't even known what time her procedure was, because when she had told him about it 2 weeks prior, he had been watching the game and had said, in a way that meant he had not heard a single word. Delia was 34 years old and had lived in Kamloops, British Columbia, her whole life. She had grown up in a house on the south side of the city near the river, the daughter of a postal worker and a school librarian who had loved each other quietly and consistently for 40 years. She had studied nursing at Thompson Rivers University, had worked 2 years in the city hospital, and then had met Derek at a mutual friend's backyard barbecue in the summer when she was 26. Derek was handsome in a way that felt significant when you were 26. He worked in commercial real estate, wore shirts that actually fit, and had a way of listening that made you feel briefly like the most interesting person in the room. He was from Calgary, had moved to Kamloops for a job opportunity, and had a confidence about him that Delia had mistaken, for a long time, for security. They married 2 years after they met. She was 28. She still had her nursing registration. She had plans, travel nursing, maybe eventually a specialization. She had a friend named Petra who was going to do a locum placement in Halifax and had invited Delia to come along, and Delia had been genuinely considering it. Then Derek got offered a partnership at his firm, and the hours got long, and he said he needed someone to hold things together at home, and Delia, who loved him, who believed in them as a unit, said she would take a leave of absence. Just temporary. Just until things settled. Her leave became a resignation. It happened slowly enough that she almost didn't notice. One form, one phone call, one quiet closing of a door she thought she could always reopen. She spent the next 6 years building a life that was entirely structured around someone else's schedule. She cooked meals timed to Derek's unpredictable arrival times, which meant many dinners that went cold and were reheated without comment. She managed the house, managed the social calendar, managed his mother's birthday and his colleagues' Christmas gifts, and the renewal of his gym membership, which he used 4 times before abandoning it. She had tried, in the early years, to suggest they have children. Derek had never said no directly. He had said not yet with such consistency that not yet had gradually revealed itself to mean never. And Delia had eventually stopped asking. She had a good life on paper, a nice house in Aberdeen, a car she liked, friends she saw occasionally. Her parents were healthy. Her younger brother Owen lived 20 minutes away with his wife and their 2 kids, and Sunday dinners at Owen's place were the part of the week Delia looked forward to most, which was something she had never quite let herself examine directly. She was not unhappy, she told herself. She was just tired. Everyone was tired. The first sign that something was wrong with her health came in the spring of that year. Fatigue that felt different from ordinary tiredness, a heaviness that didn't lift after sleep, a fogginess that sat behind her eyes all morning. She had been a nurse long enough to know her own body, and something was off. She booked an appointment with her GP, a woman named Dr. Fontaine who had been her doctor since she was a teenager. Dr. Fontaine ordered blood work, then an ultrasound, and then referred her to a gynecological specialist in Vancouver. There was a mass on her left ovary, probably benign, the specialist said, but they needed to look. Delia made all of these appointments herself. She drove to Vancouver and back in a day twice. She sat in waiting rooms with magazines she didn't read and forms she filled out alone. She told Derek about each appointment, briefly, the way you might mention a change in the weather, not because she didn't want him to care, but because she had learned, over years, not to need him to. He said okay and hope it goes well, and once, memorably, just let me know if it's serious. The morning before her laparoscopy, she had made him breakfast. She had set out his coffee, had put his yogurt and granola in a bowl for him, had reminded him about his afternoon meeting. Then she had driven herself to Royal Inland Hospital and told the intake nurse her husband was on his way. He was not on his way. In the hours after the procedure, lying in the recovery ward with the anesthesia wearing off and the October light going gray outside the window, Delia did something she had not done in a very long time. She thought clearly. Not about what had gone wrong, exactly. Not about Derek and his towels and the leaking pipe. She thought about time. She thought about the fact that she was 34 and had not worked in 6 years and had not, in a very honest reckoning, been known, truly known, asked after, cared about specifically, by the person who shared her bed in a very long time. She thought about her friend Petra, who was in Edinburgh now, working at a hospital there, sending photographs of coastal villages and autumn hillsides to their group chat, with a regularity that Delia had started to find quietly devastating. Not envious. Just aware of what a life could look like when it kept moving. She thought about a conversation she'd had with her mother, Elaine, maybe 6 months earlier. They had been in Elaine's kitchen making tea, and Elaine had said, in the careful way she had of saying important things sideways, "I just wonder sometimes if you're happy there, Del, in that house." And Delia had said she was fine. She was good. Everything was great. Because she was 34 years old and it felt ridiculous to admit to your mother that you had slowly given away every piece of yourself and didn't know how to ask for them back. She thought about all of this, lying in her hospital bed while the monitor beeped and the IV dripped and her husband called to ask about towels. And when she put down the phone, something in her chest that had been tensed for years just released. She did not go home that night. The nurses kept her for observation, which she was grateful for, and she slept better in that narrow hospital bed than she had slept in her own bedroom in months. In the morning, she called her brother Owen. "I'm coming to stay with you," she said, "just for a little while." Owen said, "I'll make up the guest room." He didn't ask why. He had been Owen her whole life. He already knew. She called her mother next. Elaine said sweetheart in a way that meant she had been waiting for this call. She cried a little. So did Delia. It was the kind of crying that feels less like grief and more like something overdue. A pressure releasing, a window finally opening. She did not call Derek until she was in a cab on the way to Owen's house. Her discharge papers folded in her coat pocket, her only bag the overnight one she had packed for the hospital. She called him from the back seat, watching the river go past the window. "I'm going to stay at Owen's for a while," she said. Silence. Then, why? She thought about the question, thought about all the things she could say. Thought about 6 years, about the drive to Vancouver and back twice, alone, about breakfast before surgery, about towels. "I need to think," she said. "About what?" "About everything." He said she was being dramatic. He said she had just had a medical procedure and was probably not thinking straight. He said he needed her to come home and sort out the kitchen because the cleaning service wasn't coming until Friday. He said this in a tone that was not unkind, exactly, but that assumed, as it always assumed, that her needs were secondary, were manageable, were a minor inconvenience to be scheduled around. Delia listened to all of this. Then she said, "Goodbye, Derek." She ended the call and watched the river a little longer. The cab smelled like pine air freshener and talk radio. It was the most peaceful she had felt in years. What followed was not easy. She wants to be honest about that, because the story would be dishonest if it suggested that walking away from a life, even a life that had been slowly hollowing you out, felt like nothing. She stayed at Owen's for 3 weeks. His wife, a practical and generous woman named Susanna, gave her the guest room without ceremony, left a kettle and a mug on the dresser, and did not push. Owen came home from work each evening and ate dinner with her and talked about ordinary things, and the ordinariness of it, the complete absence of tension, undid Delia a little bit each day, in a way that was somehow both painful and necessary. She got a letter from a lawyer Derek had apparently consulted approximately 4 days after she left. She had expected this to feel like a blow. Instead, it felt perversely like clarity. He had moved fast, which told her what she needed to know about how long he had been prepared for this possibility. She found her own lawyer, a woman named Claire, who practiced family law out of an office on Victoria Street, and who had the manner of someone who had heard everything and judged nothing. Claire walked her through what a separation agreement would look like. Delia had no income of her own and no nursing registration that was current, but she had given up a career for this marriage, and the law was not indifferent to that. She would be okay. Not immediately, not easily, but okay. She also, and this was the thing that surprised her most, she also reapplied for her nursing registration. The provincial regulatory body had a re-entry process for nurses who had been out of practice. There were courses, assessments, bridging requirements. It would take months. She enrolled the same week she moved out of Owen's guest room and into a small rented apartment on St. Paul Street, the kind of apartment that was technically too small and had a window overlooking a parking lot And that felt, in spite of all of this, like the first space that was entirely and only hers. She is not going to pretend that she did not have dark nights in that apartment. She did. There were evenings when the smallness of the space and the quietness of the street, and the particular quality of winter light in Kamloops, felt like an accusation, like evidence of something lost. She missed the kitchen in the house in Aberdeen. She missed her garden. She missed the version of herself who had believed that if she was good enough, patient enough, giving enough, it would eventually come back to her. But there were also mornings. There was a morning in December when she woke up early and made herself real coffee, the slow kind, with a press, not the hurried kind she had made for years to put in front of someone else, and sat by the window with a book, and 2 hours passed without her noticing. There was a morning in January when she got her first assignment confirmation from the reentry program and she cried, sitting on the bathroom floor in her pajamas, not from sadness but from something closer to recognition, like meeting herself again after a long time away. Her mother came to stay for a week in February. They cooked together every night. Elaine taught her a pasta dish she had learned from a neighbor 30 years ago, and Delia taught her mother how to use her new phone, and they watched old films on the laptop, side by side on the small couch, and talked until midnight the way they had not talked since Delia was a teenager. One night Elaine held her hand across the kitchen table and said, "You look like yourself again." Delia had not known how much she needed to hear that. Petra flew home from Edinburgh in March for a week for her parents' anniversary. She and Delia met for breakfast at a place downtown that had been their place in university, a small diner that had not changed in 15 years, and they sat for 4 hours and Delia told her everything. Not the curated version, the real version. Petra listened. Then she said, "I always thought Derek took up so much oxygen." "I know," Delia said. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Delia thought about it. "I think I didn't want it to be true." Petra nodded. She understood. They had known each other long enough that many things didn't need explanation. Before Petra left, she mentioned that there was a nursing opportunity in Prince Edward Island, a community health position in a small town outside Charlottetown, the kind of work Delia had always said she wanted to do before the years of saying what she wanted had quietly stopped. Petra had a contact. Delia should reach out. Delia said she would think about it. She thought about it for approximately 48 hours. Then she sent the email. The interview was a video call on a Thursday morning. She wore the blue cardigan her mother had given her. She sat in her small apartment, the parking lot visible through the window behind her, and she answered questions about her experience and her re-entry plan and her reasons for wanting to make this move. The hiring coordinator, a cheerful woman named Barbara, who looked to be about 60 and had a dog visible in the background of her screen, said they were very interested in candidates who had a history of community care and a flexible approach to the rural health environment. Delia drove out to Aberdeen that afternoon to collect the last of her things from the house. Derek was not there. She had timed it that way. She moved through the rooms she had lived in for 6 years, with a deliberateness that surprised her, not lingering, not grieving, just collecting. Her books, her grandmother's quilt, her nursing school photos from the hallway which Derek had never asked about and which she had stopped being heard about years ago. She paused in the kitchen. The pipes under the sink had been fixed. A professional had come, she assumed, in the absence of instructions about towel placement. The kitchen was clean. The house was quiet. She had spent thousands of hours in this room, cooking food for someone who ate it without looking up from his phone. She picked up her box. She walked out. She didn't look back, not because it would have broken her, but because there was nothing there she needed anymore. She got the job. She drove across the country in late April with her car packed, and a playlist Petra had made her, and a very good audiobook her mother had recommended. She stopped in Thunder Bay. She stopped in Sudbury. She called her mum from a gas station somewhere in northern Ontario at 9 o'clock at night, and they talked for an hour while the stars came out over the highway, enormous and unhurried. "You sound like yourself," Elaine said. "I know," Delia said. The town on the island was smaller than she had expected. The health center where she worked served a cluster of communities spread across red dirt roads and potato fields, and her colleagues were the kind of people who brought homemade baking to staff meetings and knew their patients by name and by family history. The pace of it was different from anything she had done. The sky in the evenings was the color of something she didn't have a word for yet. She rented a small house near the water. The landlady was a retired schoolteacher named Dorothy, who was 70 years old and kept a prolific herb garden, and who, on Delia's first evening, brought over a jar of homemade chutney and stayed for 2 hours and told her the full history of every family in a 4-kilometer radius. Delia sat at her kitchen table and listened and laughed in a way that felt genuinely surprised by itself. She wrote to Petra that night, "I think I might be okay here." Petra wrote back 3 minutes later, "I think you might be okay everywhere." You always were, you just forgot. She does not know exactly when she stopped thinking about the life she had left. It wasn't a clean break, wasn't a single moment. It was gradual, the way most real changes are. Not a door swinging open but a light slowly shifting, the room looking different by evening than it had looked in the morning. She worked. She got better at the job which she had always been good at, but which she had been away from long enough to have to earn back, like a language you once spoke fluently and had to practice again. Her patients trusted her. There was a family. A grandmother in her 70s, two adult daughters, a grandchild who was 8 and terrified of needles but who, after a few visits, had started asking for Delia specifically, and spending time with them reminded her why she had chosen this work in the first place. She hiked in the summer. She joined a women's book club in September that met at the library in the nearest town, and that was, she quickly discovered, less about books than about the specific pleasure of women in their 30s and 40s sitting together and being honest about their lives. She didn't mind. She was learning to be honest again herself. Her brother Owen visited in the fall with Susanna and the kids, and they spent a weekend at a provincial park not far from the coast. And on the last evening, Owen built a fire on the beach, and they sat around it while the kids chased each other in the dark, and Susanna fell asleep against Owen's shoulder, and the sea moved quietly at the edge of everything. Owen said, "You seem good, Delia, she said. He looked at her for a moment. "I mean it. You seem like yourself." She looked at the fire. "I keep hearing that," she said. He laughed. "Maybe that's because it's true." The divorce was finalized the following spring. She signed the papers at a notary's office on a Wednesday and went for a long walk afterwards along the shore path, the wind off the strait cold and steady, and full of that particular Atlantic smell that she had come to love, salt and cold water and something organic underneath it, something alive. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt more than anything like someone who had been holding her breath for a very long time and had finally, fully exhaled. She had been 34 when she lay in that hospital bed and looked at a water stain and listened to her husband ask about towels. She was 37 now, 3 years. Not long in the scheme of a life, but long enough to learn the difference between a life that is organized around someone else's comfort and a life that is, even in its smaller moments, your own. She thinks about that hospital bed sometimes. The beeping monitor, the gray window, the water stain shaped like a hand. She is glad she didn't go home.